Snow fell so heavily over Beaumont Manor that the world beyond its iron gates seemed to disappear beneath endless white silence. Every tower wore a crown of ice, every cedar branch bent beneath glittering frost, and every window glowed with the gentle warmth of Christmas candles. Travelers passing along the distant road often called the estate the brightest home in the county, not because of its wealth, but because its doors never closed to those in need. At the heart of that kindness stood Lady Eleanor Beaumont, whose compassion reached far beyond noble customs or royal expectations. To her, Christmas was never measured by banquets or decorations. It was measured by how many lonely souls returned home carrying hope instead of hunger. Inside the manor, Duke Alaric Beaumont watched his wife organize baskets filled with blankets, herbs, medicines, and fresh bread. Her graceful hands moved with calm confidence while servants hurried to keep pace. She had spent weeks preparing supplies for nearby villages where illness spread with frightening speed after the first great snowstorm. Physicians urged caution. Advisors begged her to remain inside the safety of the palace. Eleanor only smiled with quiet determination, insisting that titles meant nothing if they could not ease another person's suffering. Alaric admired that courage even as it filled him with quiet dread, sensing that winter held dangers no noble authority could command. Their 4 children gathered around the entrance hall as their mother knelt to embrace each of them before leaving. 12-year-old Evan tried to hide his worry behind careful questions about the route through the forest. Curious by nature, he memorized maps and always searched for practical solutions, believing every mystery possessed an answer if observed closely enough. 10-year-old Lila clung to Eleanor's sleeves with tearful eyes, promising to finish the watercolor painting they had begun together before Christmas morning arrived. 9-year-old Theo proudly presented a tiny wooden lantern he had built himself, insisting it would guide her safely through the storm. Little Clara, only 6, wrapped both arms around her mother's waist without speaking. She simply rested her cheek against Eleanor's dress, unwilling to let go. Eleanor kissed each child softly before taking Alaric's hands into her own. She saw the concern hidden beneath his composed expression and answered it before he spoke. "If love waits for perfect weather," she whispered, "it never reaches those who need it most." Then she climbed into the waiting carriage, disappearing into the curtain of swirling snow while her family remained beneath the great stone archway, watching until horse and lantern vanished into the white horizon. The village lay many miles beyond frozen woods where pneumonia had already stolen parents, grandparents, and infants alike. Eleanor spent 3 relentless days tending the sick, brewing herbal remedies beside exhausted nurses, comforting frightened children, and carrying water from frozen wells when stronger men collapsed from fever. She refused the warm room repeatedly offered to her, choosing instead to remain beside the weakest patients throughout each bitter night. By the time the final family recovered enough to survive without constant care, Eleanor herself had developed a violent cough that no amount of rest could quiet. She returned to Beaumont Manor pale and shivering despite layers of heavy winter cloaks. Alaric rushed her upstairs while physicians hurried through endless corridors carrying leather satchels filled with medicines that suddenly seemed painfully inadequate. The children waited outside her chamber, listening to muffled conversations that grew quieter with every passing hour. Snow continued falling without mercy beyond the windows, covering gardens, statues, and rooftops until the estate itself seemed buried beneath winter's enormous weight. Late one evening the physician emerged with lowered eyes. No dramatic speech was needed. Alaric understood the truth before a single word escaped the old doctor's lips. He entered Eleanor's room alone. Candlelight flickered across her gentle face as she struggled to breathe. Though weakened almost beyond strength, she reached for his hand with the same warmth that had first captured his heart years earlier. Tears filled his eyes as he begged her not to leave them, promising every doctor, every healer, every miracle within the kingdom if only she would remain. Eleanor smiled faintly, not with resignation but with enduring peace. Her gaze drifted toward the frosted window overlooking the sleeping estate. "Promise me something," she whispered. Alaric nodded before she even finished speaking. Her fingers tightened around his hand with surprising strength. "Don't let our home become a palace without love." Those words settled into the room like falling snow, gentle yet impossibly heavy. Moments later her breathing slowed, her smile remained, and silence claimed the chamber forever. Grief descended upon Beaumont Manor with greater force than the winter storm outside. The funeral bells echoed across frozen hills while villagers lined the roads carrying white roses in honor of the woman who had given them her final strength. Alaric buried every emotion beneath endless estate meetings and legal papers because work demanded less courage than mourning. He convinced himself the children needed stability more than tears, never realizing that silence could wound as deeply as loss. The manor changed with frightening subtlety. Fireplaces no longer spread comforting warmth through distant corridors. Drafts slipped beneath ancient doors that had always closed perfectly before. Chandeliers flickered unpredictably despite careful maintenance. Water pipes groaned through the walls during the night. The great fountain in the central courtyard froze and never flowed again. Garden glasshouses lost their heat, causing Eleanor's beloved winter flowers to wither. Servants blamed age, weather, and one another, yet repairs somehow never lasted. Every solution seemed temporary, as though the estate itself resisted being mended. The children drifted into separate worlds of quiet sorrow. Evan filled notebooks with observations about every strange failure throughout the palace, convinced the pattern meant something others overlooked. Lila abandoned bright colors altogether, painting only lonely forests beneath gray skies. Theo dismantled broken clocks, hinges, and lamps, hoping inventions might somehow restore the cheerful home he remembered, but every experiment ended in disappointment. Clara stopped speaking entirely. Physicians examined her. Tutors encouraged her. Priests prayed beside her. Nothing reached the little girl whose voice seemed buried alongside her mother beneath the frozen earth. Weeks became months, and servants resigned with increasing frequency. Experienced cooks complained that ovens refused to behave. Housekeepers insisted impossible drafts wandered through perfectly sealed rooms. Stable hands claimed the heating pipes beneath the barns failed without explanation. Whispered rumors spread through nearby villages that Beaumont Manor had become cursed after its lady's passing. Alaric dismissed every superstition, replacing departing workers with new ones who inevitably left just as discouraged. The palace remained magnificent to visiting nobles, yet everyone living within its walls felt an invisible fracture growing wider each passing season. As another Christmas approached, the final cook resigned without warning after the main kitchen stove cracked beyond use during preparations for the holiday feast. With guests already invited and no replacement willing to travel through the harsh winter, the steward reluctantly posted one last notice seeking a temporary Christmas cook. 3 mornings later, as snow drifted gently across the silent courtyard, a sturdy wagon rolled through the gates beside a smiling, full-figured woman carrying battered copper pots and a worn leather satchel. She paused before the enormous manor, studying every chimney, window, and stone with strangely knowing eyes, then whispered almost to herself, "This house is asking for help." Morning sunlight filtered through frost-covered windows as the heavy wooden gates of Beaumont Manor opened to admit the newcomer. Martha Wren guided her weathered wagon into the courtyard without haste, her boots leaving deep prints across the fresh snow. She was a broad-shouldered, full-figured woman whose simple wool cloak carried patches from years of careful mending. Loose strands of chestnut hair escaped beneath her bonnet, and although the journey had reddened her cheeks, her warm hazel eyes moved calmly across the towering estate with quiet concentration. She seemed less impressed by its grandeur than curious about its condition, studying cracked stonework, crooked chimneys, and uneven smoke rising from several fireplaces before she even acknowledged the servants waiting to greet her. The head steward, Percival Graves, frowned the moment he saw her. Thin as a walking cane and proud of every polished button on his uniform, he had expected someone younger, slimmer, and easier to command. His lips curled into a smile that never reached his eyes. "You are the Christmas cook?" he asked, unable to conceal his disbelief. Martha nodded politely and offered him the folded hiring letter. Graves glanced at it with exaggerated reluctance before handing it back. "We required speed and refinement," he muttered loudly enough for nearby servants to hear. "Instead, they have sent us generosity of appetite." A ripple of laughter spread through the gathered staff. Kitchen maids covered their smiles behind flour-dusted hands while stable boys exchanged amused glances. Martha neither blushed nor protested. She simply thanked the steward for receiving her and asked, "Would you kindly show me the kitchen before I unpack?" Her gentle answer somehow robbed his insult of its triumph. Annoyed by her composure, Graves led her through the manor's winding corridors while continuing to list strict rules, expecting her to stumble beneath the weight of impossible expectations. She listened attentively, occasionally asking thoughtful questions about the estate's routines rather than defending herself against his quiet ridicule. The great kitchen reflected the sadness that lingered throughout Beaumont Manor. Smoke drifted unevenly from the enormous stove. Copper pots hung crookedly above soot-blackened stone walls. Shelves overflowed with mismatched ingredients carelessly stored after months of changing cooks. One oven door sagged upon cracked hinges while another leaked heat through fractured bricks. Martha slowly turned in a complete circle, absorbing every detail before removing her gloves. Instead of reaching for cooking utensils, she crouched beside the largest stove and ran her fingertips across the cracked masonry. Her expression became thoughtful rather than discouraged. "Has this chimney always drawn smoke backward?" she asked one elderly scullery maid. "For nearly a year," the woman admitted. "3 masons tried fixing it." Martha nodded softly. "They repaired the symptom, not the cause." Without requesting assistance, she gathered discarded bricks, iron tools, damp clay, and an old wire brush hidden beneath a cabinet. The amused servants watched, expecting an embarrassing failure. Instead, Martha carefully dismantled a section of damaged stone, revealing years of soot clogging a narrow air passage almost completely closed by loose mortar. She cleaned every obstruction, rebuilt the cracked chamber with surprising precision, reinforced weakened joints, and adjusted the iron damper using little more than practical experience and patient observation. Barely an hour later she lit a small fire. Smoke rushed cleanly upward through the chimney without filling the room. Warm air spread steadily across the kitchen for the first time in months. Silence replaced laughter. Even Graves stared in reluctant disbelief. The elderly maid whispered, "The blacksmith couldn't manage that." Martha merely smiled. The stove was trying to breathe. She spent the remainder of the morning inspecting pantry shelves before preparing a simple broth. As she sorted dried herbs and spices, her fingers paused over one unmarked container. She lifted the lid, inhaled cautiously, then frowned. Mixed among fragrant seasonings lay poisonous foxglove leaves that could have sickened dozens during the Christmas feast. Nearby sat spoiled flour infested with damp mold and several sacks of onions already beginning to rot from improper storage. Martha quietly separated every dangerous ingredient without announcing her discovery. When Graves questioned why she discarded expensive supplies, she calmly invited him to summon the physician. After examining the herbs, the doctor confirmed her judgment, praising her keen knowledge before ordering the contaminated stores destroyed immediately. Embarrassed servants exchanged uneasy looks, realizing disaster had been narrowly avoided. Word of the incident reached Duke Alaric during afternoon estate meetings. He offered no praise, merely instructing the steward to purchase fresh provisions. Yet curiosity lingered behind his otherwise restrained expression. Competence had become rare enough within the manor to deserve silent notice. As evening approached, warm aromas of fresh bread, roasted vegetables, and herb-infused stew drifted through corridors long accustomed to burnt meals and hurried preparation. The comforting scent attracted the children one by one. Theo arrived first, pretending to inspect the repaired stove while secretly examining the unusual tools Martha carried inside her satchel. Evan entered moments later, fascinated by the efficient order replacing the kitchen's former chaos. Lila lingered near the doorway, sketchbook tucked beneath her arm, captivated by the peaceful rhythm of Martha's work. None of them spoke immediately. They simply watched as she kneaded dough with practiced confidence, humming softly beneath her breath. Only Clara remained hidden behind the pantry door, peering silently into the room. Martha noticed her reflection in a polished copper pot but never acknowledged it directly. Instead, she divided a piece of dough into several small portions and began shaping delicate little birds with careful fingers. After placing them upon the table, she quietly resumed stirring the stew. Curiosity overcame fear. Clara stepped forward, hesitated only briefly, then reached for another piece of dough. Without exchanging a single word, the little girl copied Martha's movements, carefully creating her own imperfect bird. Martha smiled with quiet encouragement, never praising nor correcting her. She simply placed Clara's tiny creation beside the others as though it belonged there from the beginning. The children remained in the kitchen long after supper ended. They laughed softly when Theo accidentally covered himself in flour, smiled as Lila decorated bread with tiny berry patterns, and listened while Martha explained how every loaf required patience because rushing warmth only ruined what deserved time to rise. Clara never spoke, yet she stayed close beside Martha until the candles burned low, her small hands no longer trembling. Later that night, while the manor settled into uneasy silence, Martha carried a lantern through an empty corridor instead of returning to her room. She paused before an old service door hidden behind faded tapestries, unlocked it with surprising familiarity, and disappeared into the darkness beneath the palace. Unseen by her, another smaller shadow slipped quietly after her, holding its breath as the hidden door closed without a sound. Theo barely slept that night. Long after the household retired and every corridor surrendered to darkness, he slipped from his bedroom wearing thick wool socks to silence his footsteps. Moonlight spilled across polished floors as he followed the faint glow of Martha's lantern through the hidden service passage concealed behind faded tapestries. The narrow staircase descended beneath Beaumont Manor into forgotten corridors lined with ancient stone, where cold air carried the scent of damp earth, iron, and wood that had not been touched in decades. Theo's heartbeat quickened with every careful step, convinced he was about to uncover a secret no one else had ever seen. Martha moved confidently through the underground passages without hesitation, as though she already knew every turn. She paused beside rusted iron pipes disappearing into the walls and knelt before an enormous mechanical valve coated with years of grime. Instead of appearing confused, she removed small tools from her worn leather satchel and examined each gear with practiced precision. Theo watched in astonishment as she loosened frozen bolts, replaced fractured washers with carefully carved wooden pieces, polished corroded metal, and adjusted heavy levers until the entire mechanism groaned softly back to life. Moments later, warm water rushed through pipes that had remained silent since Lady Eleanor's death. Martha smiled quietly, wiped grease from her hands and whispered, "There you are. You were never broken. Only forgotten." Theo hurried back upstairs before she noticed him. Minutes later, while pretending to sleep, he heard distant vibrations beneath the floorboards. By morning the eastern wing, long abandoned because of freezing rooms, held steady warmth for the first time in years. Servants praised the maintenance crew, who stared at one another in complete confusion because none of them had touched the heating system. Graves insisted the improvement resulted from luck, but even he sounded uncertain. The mysterious changes continued with remarkable consistency. Every dawn revealed another problem somehow solved during the night. A staircase that had creaked dangerously for months suddenly stood firm beneath every step. Windows that once rattled endlessly against winter winds now closed without effort. The cracked greenhouse pipes began carrying warm water again, allowing Eleanor's neglected winter roses to produce tiny green shoots despite the relentless snow outside. The manor slowly exhaled after years of holding its breath. Evan noticed the pattern almost immediately. His notebooks already contained detailed records of every failing beam, drafty hallway, broken lock, and leaking ceiling throughout Beaumont Manor. One evening he spread the pages across his bedroom floor, comparing old observations with the estate's recent improvements. Every repaired corner matched a previous complaint. Yet no invoices appeared in the steward's records, no craftsmen arrived through the gates, and no workers claimed responsibility. Logic insisted someone was secretly rebuilding the house while everyone else slept. Meanwhile, Martha devoted her daylight hours entirely to ordinary kitchen duties. She prepared nourishing meals, baked fragrant bread, and welcomed every curious child who wandered into the warmth surrounding her stove. Yet beneath those simple routines she observed every cough, every tired face, and every strained movement among the household. When Duke Alaric accepted his evening tea, he never questioned why its flavor had subtly changed. Martha had quietly blended willow bark, lavender, lemon balm, and peppermint into delicate herbal infusions after noticing the tension tightening his temples during meals. Within 2 weeks his relentless headaches faded. The physician congratulated himself upon successful treatment despite having altered nothing. Martha accepted the misunderstanding without correction. Her quiet care reached beyond the Duke. Elderly gardeners found soothing salves waiting beside their gloves after long hours in the snow. A maid with swollen joints discovered warm compresses folded neatly outside her chamber before sunrise. Stable hands suffering cracked skin received homemade ointments tucked anonymously into coat pockets. Nobody knew their mysterious benefactor, yet the household gradually became healthier, calmer, and strangely more hopeful. Kindness itself seemed to circulate through the manor like returning warmth. Late one snowy evening, Theo's curiosity overwhelmed caution once again. He followed Martha through different passages until she climbed a narrow spiral staircase leading into the abandoned West Music Hall. Dust floated through silver moonlight pouring across shattered windows. A magnificent grand piano rested beneath faded sheets, untouched since Lady Eleanor's funeral. Martha gently uncovered the instrument and traced her fingertips across yellowed keys with unmistakable affection. She opened the lid, adjusted several broken strings using tools from her satchel, tightened worn tuning pins, and patiently restored the instrument until every note answered clearly. Then she began to play. The melody floated through the silent hall with breathtaking tenderness, filling forgotten rooms with music that seemed woven from memory itself. Theo recognized the tune immediately. It was the unfinished Christmas composition his mother had practiced during her final winter, always stopping before the last page because she claimed inspiration had not yet arrived. Martha somehow knew every missing note. The melody unfolded naturally, completing itself with quiet grace as though waiting years for the right hands to awaken it. Tears slipped down Theo's cheeks before he even realized he was crying. When the final note faded, Martha remained seated without moving. Softly, almost reverently, she whispered into the empty hall, "I hope I finished it the way you dreamed." Theo understood then that she had not invented the ending. She had somehow known Lady Eleanor. The following morning he secretly told Evan everything he had witnessed. Instead of dismissing the story as childish imagination, Evan listened with unusual seriousness. Together they compared Theo's observations with Eleanor's old journals stored in the library. Among sketches of gardens and Christmas decorations they found technical drawings unlike anything they expected. Lady Eleanor had spent years designing improvements for Beaumont Manor's heating, plumbing, and ventilation, hoping to create a warmer home for both family and servants. Many pages remained unfinished, covered with unanswered calculations and incomplete diagrams. Evan stared at the elegant handwriting before whispering, "Someone is finishing Mother's work." Lila noticed changes impossible to measure with blueprints. Sunlight seemed brighter within rooms that had once felt gray. Servants smiled more often without realizing why. Fresh flowers survived longer inside restored conservatories. Even the echo throughout the grand entrance hall softened after hidden drafts disappeared. She painted the transformed spaces with colors absent from her artwork since Eleanor's death, discovering hope returning to her brush one careful stroke at a time. Only Duke Alaric remained unaware of the invisible hands reshaping his world. Buried beneath endless responsibilities, he appreciated the growing comfort without questioning its source. He believed time alone was easing the estate's burdens, never imagining that one determined woman labored every night to mend wounds extending far beyond cracked stone or frozen pipes. Yet not everyone welcomed these mysterious improvements. Graves grew increasingly suspicious, convinced someone threatened the authority he guarded so fiercely. Near midnight, as another gentle snowfall blanketed Beaumont Manor, Martha descended once more into the hidden passages carrying her lantern and leather satchel. This time she stopped before an enormous iron door secured by rusted chains and an ancient lock bearing the Beaumont family crest. After studying the mechanism carefully, she reached inside her satchel and unfolded a faded blueprint whose edges had nearly crumbled with age. A small handwritten note rested beside the drawing, signed in unmistakable script by Lady Eleanor Beaumont herself. Martha closed her eyes briefly, unlocked the massive door, and disappeared beyond it, never noticing Graves watching silently from the shadows above. Christmas week settled over Beaumont Manor beneath brilliant skies and crisp white snow, yet the warmth returning to the estate stirred resentment within one heart instead of gratitude. Percival Graves walked through the corridors with increasing unease, watching servants laugh more freely, hearing children race through halls that had once echoed only with silence, and smelling fresh bread where burned meals had become ordinary. Every repaired fireplace, every polished window, and every smiling face reminded him that respect was quietly shifting away from his authority. For years he had controlled the household by insisting that every failure resulted from impossible circumstances. Martha's quiet competence threatened that carefully maintained illusion. He began following her whenever opportunity allowed. Hidden behind pillars and half-open doors, he observed her carrying baskets of herbs into forgotten storerooms, measuring ancient pipes beneath staircases, and speaking kindly to exhausted servants who trusted her without hesitation. None of those actions violated palace rules, yet Graves interpreted every unexplained improvement as evidence of dangerous ambition. Unable to discover wrongdoing, he decided to create it instead. Quietly he gathered broken tools Martha had discarded after repairs, incomplete sketches found near old maintenance tunnels, and a copy of Lady Eleanor's faded blueprint that had slipped from Martha's satchel while she carried supplies through the cellar. To Graves, appearances mattered more than truth. One bitter afternoon he requested a private audience with Duke Alaric. Snow drifted beyond the library windows while the steward carefully arranged his collected evidence across the great oak desk. He spoke with measured confidence, claiming the temporary cook wandered through restricted passages without permission, tampered with the palace's ancient mechanisms, and secretly altered structural systems no servant possessed authority to touch. He suggested such reckless interference endangered everyone living within Beaumont Manor. The Duke listened in silence, studying the weathered blueprint bearing Eleanor's unmistakable handwriting. His expression remained unreadable, yet old habits of caution outweighed unfamiliar trust. Palace rules existed for reasons beyond personal intentions. Alaric summoned Martha before sunset. She entered the library carrying flour upon her sleeves after preparing Christmas pastries with the children. Her calm eyes moved from Graves to the scattered papers before settling upon the Duke. She immediately recognized Eleanor's blueprint lying among the accusations. For a brief moment sadness flickered across her face, but it disappeared almost instantly beneath quiet dignity. Alaric asked whether she had entered forbidden areas beneath the estate. Martha answered honestly that she had. He asked whether she repaired ancient systems without permission. Again she answered yes. Graves smiled triumphantly before the Duke raised one final question. Why? Martha looked toward the frosted windows where fading daylight touched the snow-covered gardens Eleanor had once loved. Because the house was asking for help, she replied simply. Every broken pipe, every failing furnace, every neglected passage was another promise left unfinished. I believed repairing them served this family better than waiting for permission while the manor continued falling apart. Graves interrupted before Alaric could respond. He declared that good intentions never excused disobedience. Rules preserved noble households, and servants who ignored boundaries encouraged chaos. Several senior staff members reluctantly nodded, fearful of opposing the steward publicly. The Duke remained silent for a long moment, torn between undeniable improvements throughout the estate and the discipline expected of his position. At last he spoke with restrained regret. You have served faithfully, Martha. Nevertheless, Beaumont Manor cannot overlook broken protocol. You will remain until Christmas Day. After the celebrations conclude, your employment here will end. No anger crossed Martha's face. She lowered her head respectfully and answered, Thank you for allowing me to help while I could. Without another word she gathered the blueprint, placed it gently upon the desk, and walked quietly from the library. News of the decision spread through the palace faster than winter wind. Kitchen maids wept openly while gardeners exchanged stunned glances. Stable hands muttered that no one else had restored warmth to the barns. Even elderly servants who had scarcely spoken to one another since Lady Eleanor's death looked genuinely heartbroken. The children heard the whispers before supper and rushed toward the library together, refusing to believe the woman who had transformed their home could simply disappear. Evan entered first, clutching the notebooks documenting every mysterious repair. He placed them before his father and carefully explained how every failing corridor, broken hinge, frozen pipe, and damaged staircase had been restored only after Martha arrived. His voice trembled, yet every observation remained precise. Theo followed by spreading his own sketches across the desk, revealing detailed drawings of the hidden heating valve Martha had repaired beneath the manor. He admitted following her through secret passages, expecting to uncover mischief but instead discovering tireless labor performed entirely for others. Lila silently unfolded several paintings completed over recent weeks. One showed the greenhouse blooming again. Another captured servants smiling beside warm fireplaces. The final painting portrayed Beaumont Manor glowing beneath Christmas lights exactly as it had during Eleanor's lifetime. Alaric studied each page without interruption. The evidence contradicted everything Graves had claimed. Yet uncertainty still lingered. Repairing stone and metal did not explain why his children looked happier than they had in years. A gentle sound broke the silence. Tiny footsteps crossed the polished floor. Every face turned toward the doorway. Clara stood there clutching the little bread bird she had shaped beside Martha on her first evening in the kitchen. She walked slowly into the center of the library while tears shimmered within her wide blue eyes. No one moved. Physicians, tutors, servants, and even her own family had waited years to hear her voice again. She looked directly at her father. Softly, almost like a fragile prayer, she whispered, "Please don't send her away." The room froze. Alaric stared at his youngest daughter, unable to breathe. Graves dropped the papers in his hands. Clara swallowed nervously before taking another step forward. She didn't take Mother's place, she continued, each precious word growing steadier. She fixed everything Mother couldn't finish. Silence swept through the library with overwhelming force. The Duke's eyes filled instantly. Not because the argument had defeated him. Because his little girl, silent since Eleanor's death, had spoken for the first time. At that very moment Martha quietly appeared in the open doorway, having returned only to leave fresh herbal tea for the exhausted household before her departure. Hearing Clara's trembling voice, she stopped without entering. Her own eyes glistened as she watched the child standing bravely before everyone. She neither interrupted nor defended herself. She simply placed the steaming tray upon a nearby table, turned gently toward the corridor, and began walking away while snowflakes drifted past the tall windows. Behind her, Duke Alaric finally found the strength to call her name, but before she could answer, a deep metallic rumble echoed beneath the manor, followed by the sudden awakening of machinery that had remained silent for years. The deep metallic rumble rolled beneath Beaumont Manor like distant thunder, causing crystal chandeliers to tremble gently overhead. Every conversation stopped. Servants looked toward the floor in alarm while Duke Alaric instinctively stepped in front of his children. Yet instead of destruction, a remarkable transformation slowly unfolded. One by one, fireplaces throughout the manor blazed to life with steady golden flames. Cold corridors that had remained lifeless for years filled with comforting warmth. Hidden vents within the ancient walls released gentle currents of heated air that spread evenly through every chamber. Lamps along the grand staircase brightened without servants touching a single wick. The manor seemed to awaken from a long winter sleep. Alaric hurried after Martha, finding her standing quietly in the central corridor as though she had expected the moment to arrive. She looked neither surprised nor frightened. Instead, she watched the glowing walls with peaceful satisfaction. Snow reflected through the tall windows while warm light shimmered across polished marble floors, restoring the welcoming beauty Beaumont Manor had once possessed during Eleanor's happiest Christmas celebrations. "What just happened?" Alaric asked, his voice carrying equal parts wonder and confusion. Martha looked toward the ceiling where warm air drifted silently through hidden stone channels. Someone finally finished her work. Without another word she picked up her lantern and led him through the forgotten service passages beneath the manor. Evan, Lila, Theo, Clara, and several trusted servants followed close behind. Even Graves, shaken by everything he had witnessed, trailed silently after them. The narrow tunnel ended before the enormous iron door Martha had unlocked the previous evening. This time she pushed it open completely. Beyond it lay a hidden chamber unlike anything Alaric had ever seen. Rows of carefully preserved blueprints covered long wooden tables. Shelves overflowed with journals, engineering sketches, botanical studies, musical manuscripts, and architectural models. Every page bore the graceful handwriting of Lady Eleanor Beaumont. The Duke slowly stepped forward, touching one weathered notebook with trembling fingers. "My God!" His voice broke. "I never knew." Martha carefully unfolded the largest blueprint. Across its surface stretched an intricate design labeled in Eleanor's handwriting. The Living Warmth System. Detailed drawings revealed an ingenious network of underground heating channels, hidden ventilation shafts, insulated water pipes, reflective light passages, and energy-saving furnaces designed to warm every room of Beaumont Manor while using half the firewood consumed by ordinary estates. Eleanor had envisioned a house where servants would no longer freeze in distant quarters, children could play comfortably throughout winter, and visiting villagers would always find warmth within its walls. Many calculations stopped halfway across the pages. Entire sections remained unfinished. Eleanor had died before completing them. Alaric stared at the incomplete drawings in stunned silence. "I never knew she was designing this." "You weren't meant to," Martha answered softly. "She wanted it finished before surprising you one Christmas." The children looked between the plans and Martha with growing amazement. Theo suddenly recognized several mechanisms she had repaired beneath the manor. Evan realized every mysterious improvement matched one unfinished section within Eleanor's designs. Lila quietly opened another notebook containing sketches of brighter kitchens, warmer classrooms, and gardens blooming during winter. None of them had been dreams. They had all been plans waiting for someone brave enough to finish them. Alaric slowly turned toward Martha. "How do you know all this?" For the first time since arriving at Beaumont Manor, Martha spoke openly about her past. "When I was young," she began quietly, "I studied at the Royal Academy of Estate Architecture. I became Lady Eleanor's apprentice." The room fell completely silent. She believed buildings should care for people the way people cared for each other. "We worked together for 3 years. When illness closed the academy, everyone scattered. I returned home to care for my aging father. Life changed. My father died. My village disappeared after terrible floods. I earned my living wherever honest work could be found. Cooking fed hungry people. Healing eased suffering. Repairing broken places reminded me that nothing beautiful should be abandoned." She gently rested one hand upon Eleanor's unfinished plans. "When I learned Lady Eleanor had died, I couldn't bear the thought of these dreams dying with her. So I came." Tears slipped silently down Alaric's face. For years he had believed grief demanded preserving memories exactly as they were. Standing inside the hidden chamber, he finally understood that Eleanor had never wanted memories preserved. She had wanted hope completed. His voice trembled. "You rebuilt my home." Martha slowly shook her head. "No. I repaired what grief persuaded everyone to stop seeing." She looked toward the glowing tunnels carrying warmth through the estate. Your wife had already imagined every answer. I simply finished what she began. Those words shattered the final wall around Alaric's heart. For the first time since Eleanor's death, he openly wept. Not with despair. With gratitude. His children surrounded him instinctively. Evan quietly closed his notebook. Lila leaned against his shoulder. Theo slipped his small hand into his father's. Little Clara stepped toward Martha. Without hesitation she embraced the woman around the waist. "It feels warm again," she whispered. Then she looked toward the hidden blueprints. "It feels like Mother is smiling." No one in the room could speak. Even Graves lowered his head in shame. Slowly he stepped forward. "I accused you because I feared becoming unnecessary." His voice cracked beneath genuine remorse. "I forgot that leadership exists to protect people, not pride." He bowed deeply. "Please forgive me." Martha offered him the same gentle smile she had shown every servant since her arrival. "Then help protect this home with me." Christmas Eve arrived beneath softly falling snow. Instead of hosting an extravagant royal banquet, Alaric opened Beaumont Manor to the surrounding villages exactly as Eleanor had once done. Families entered laughing through gates that had stood emotionally closed for years. Children warmed frozen hands beside newly restored fireplaces. Musicians filled the grand hall with joyful melodies. When the restored piano stood waiting beneath thousands of candlelights, Martha quietly took her seat before it. She played Eleanor's unfinished Christmas composition. This time the melody reached its final note. The entire hall rose in silent respect before erupting into heartfelt applause. Many servants openly cried. Several villagers remembered hearing Eleanor hum that same melody years earlier. Now it was complete. Just like her dream. Winter slowly gave way to spring. The restored gardens burst into brilliant color. The greenhouse overflowed with flowers once believed impossible to grow. Martha refused every attempt to reward her with jewels, expensive gowns, or generous wages. Instead she spent each day teaching the Beaumont children everything Eleanor had hoped they would learn. Evan studied architecture and engineering. Lila learned music and botanical illustration. Theo eagerly mastered mechanical design beside the restored heating system. Clara planted healing herbs while slowly rediscovering laughter. The manor no longer depended upon one remarkable woman. She had taught everyone else how to care for it together. As months passed, Alaric found himself falling quietly in love. Not because Martha resembled Eleanor. She never tried to. She honored Eleanor's memory while creating a future no longer imprisoned by sorrow. Love returned not by replacing what had been lost, but by giving that loss a purpose. On a radiant summer evening, Beaumont Manor hosted the grandest garden celebration in its history. Noble families, villagers, servants, and friends gathered beneath flowering arches illuminated by thousands of lanterns. At the center of Eleanor's restored rose garden stood Alaric and Martha surrounded by the 4 smiling children. Before every guest, the Duke took Martha's hands. "You came here as a Christmas cook. You became the guardian of my wife's dream. You healed my children. You healed this house. And without ever asking, you healed me." He knelt before her. "Martha Wren, will you become my wife?" Tears filled her eyes as laughter and joyful applause echoed through the gardens. She gently lifted him to his feet before answering, "Yes." Clara stepped forward carrying Eleanor's favorite winter rose brooch. With careful hands she pinned it onto Martha's dress. "It belonged to Mother," she whispered. "I think she would want you to wear it now." The evening bells rang across Beaumont Manor as the family embraced beneath the golden sunset. Months later Martha became Duchess Martha Beaumont, never replacing Lady Eleanor, but forever preserving her legacy while writing a beautiful new chapter beside those she loved. Every Christmas thereafter, travelers again called Beaumont Manor the warmest home in the county, not because of its magnificent fireplaces or remarkable engineering, but because everyone who entered left believing broken hearts, like broken houses, could be lovingly rebuilt when someone cared enough to finish what hope had started.